Unity of Houston is an inclusive church where we seek to understand and live the teachings of Jesus and other spiritual masters. At Unity, we welcome all people from all spiritual paths and every walk of life. We celebrate the diversity of our city and of our world, and we teach love, tolerance, and oneness, seeking to live in harmony with open minds and open hearts.
Wherever you are in your spiritual path, you are always welcome at Unity. Join us and discover that the life of your dreams is already within you. It is Father's Day, and I'm starting a new tradition. Last year I began with horrible dad jokes, so we're just going to keep it going. How's that? What did the janitor say when he jumped out of the closet? Supplies! I ruined my punchline. Okay. I only know 25 letters of the alphabet. I don't know why. I don't trust those trees. They look kind of shady. And one more. Thank you. I ordered a chicken and an egg from Amazon. I'll let you know. Come on, it's pretty good, right? So not only is today Father's Day, today is June 19th. Today is Juneteenth. Very special day. So I was like, how are we going to do fathers, and how are we going to honor Juneteenth and talk about the history of that and why it's important? And it was actually this song that Siobhan just sang. That's what came to me, that we are giving honor. That's what we're doing. We're honoring our dads, and we're honoring those who came before in this evolutionary journey of greater and greater freedom. So I want to begin by just giving a little bit of the history of Juneteenth. I didn't even know about it until I moved to Texas in the late 80s, and I kind of got the story, but I just really thought it was a celebration, you know, and there was barbecue and music, and I'm sad to say I was so ignorant, but I have learned quite a bit since then. So this information I'm about to share with you comes from the National Museum of African American History in Washington, D.C. On Freedom's Eve, the eve of January 1st, 1863, the first watch night services took place. And on that night, enslaved and free African Americans gathered in churches and private homes all across the country, awaiting the news that the Emancipation Proclamation had taken effect. And at the stroke of midnight, prayers were answered, as all enslaved people in Confederate states were legally declared free. Union soldiers, many of whom were black, marched onto plantations and across cities in the South, reading small copies of the Emancipation Proclamation, spreading the news of freedom in Confederate states. And only through the 13th Amendment did the emancipation end slavery throughout the United States. But not everyone in Confederate territory would be immediately freed. Even though the Emancipation Proclamation was made effective in 1863, it could not be implemented in places still under Confederate control. As a result, in the westernmost Confederate state of Texas, enslaved people would not be freed until much later, literally 2.5 years later. Freedom finally came on June 19, 1865, when some 2,000 Union troops arrived in Galveston Bay. The Army announced that the more than 250,000 enslaved black people in the state were freed by executive decree. The day came to be known as Juneteenth by the newly freed people in Texas. In the post-emancipation period, known as Reconstruction, roughly 1865 to 1877, it marked an era of great hope and uncertainty and struggle for a nation as a whole. And formerly enslaved people immediately sought to reunify families, establish schools, to run for political office, to push radical legislation, even sue slaveholders for compensation. Given the 200-plus years of enslavement, such changes were nothing short of amazing. Not even a generation out of slavery, African Americans were inspired and empowered to transform their lives and our country. Juneteenth marks our country's second Independence Day. Although it has been long celebrated in the African American community, this monumental event remains largely unknown to most Americans. I want to share with you a little bit of my own journey. And I do so with a little trepidation because, like I said, I didn't know what I didn't know, and I still don't know what I don't know. But I am committed to learning to learning more of the true history of what our country has been and if we're ever going to be what we can be, we have to know what we have been and where we are. Houston has a big part in this journey. I don't know if you know, but Jack Yates, he was born in 1828 in Virginia. He was an enslaved child. Think about that. As a child, he was owned by white plantation owners. And he had this desire to become literate, and it was not easy. He had to struggle, but he finally achieved it. He could read and write, and he became ordained as a Baptist preacher, and he pastored the very first African-American Baptist church here in Houston, Antioch Missionary Baptist Church, which I'm happy to say is still an active and alive community. Right now, Reverend Sheila Jackson Lee and a whole host of dignitaries and leaders are over there holding a prayer service right now. And so we send Antioch Baptist our love and support and our fellowship, our brotherhood and sisterhood today, absolutely. And the descendants of Jack Yates, and many of you know Jack Yates High School, where Felicia Rashad Allen and Debbie Allen graduated, and a lot of other famous people named in his honor. I think that the family says that's the thing he would be most proud of, that there's a school in his name. And then there's Opal Lee. You all know the story. She calls herself the grandmother of Juneteenth. Miss Opal lives in Fort Worth. She's still around, and she, at the age of 89, she decided that she wanted to have a part in seeking a national recognition of Juneteenth and its importance. I'll tell you more about that in a moment, but she was confronted with the ugly realities of racism in this nation as a child. At 9 years old, her family moved to an all-white neighborhood, and they were confronted by a mob at their front door. And her father came out with a gun, and the policeman said, if you cock that gun, you're all dead. They burned their house down. Opal Lee was sent to be with the neighbors for a while. She said her parents never spoke of that incident again. Can you imagine? This traumatic, life-altering experience of cruelty and hatred, and to not speak of it. What they did instead, which is what so many of these honorable men and women did, is they built again. They found new jobs and built a new home. They owned their own home, and they raised her. She was an educator. She, again, knew the power of education. And so she did her best to instill in her children, and in those children she taught, these beautiful principles of freedom, equality, that are here for all of us, even though she herself had seen just the opposite of that. But at 89 years old, she got a little fire under her. She said, I'm going to do what I can do to see that Juneteenth becomes recognized as a federal holiday. So she made a plan to walk from Fort Worth, Texas to Washington, D.C., to bring awareness. She's like, they're not going to ignore any little old lady out there walking across the country. And she had every intention of walking every one of those steps, 1,400 miles, but her people said, no, you can't do that. But what she did instead was organize a series of 2.5-mile walks. And she walked with, I saw her with pushing a baby stroller for support, another time with a walker on wheels. And she walked over 300 miles of that herself. And people joined her. People of all races, of all political parties, joined her to bring awareness to this. And last summer, she was in the hall of the United States Congress when it was passed to make Juneteenth a federal holiday. She was standing next to President Joe Biden when he signed that bill into law. So that's why the banks close and the post office closed tomorrow, thanks to Opal Lee and others. So let's give some love to Miss Opal Lee. In an interview I saw this week, she said that when she stood there with President Biden as he signed it into law, she said she felt this strong, overpowering urge to do a holy dance. But she said every time I do that, her grandchildren said it looks like she's twerking, so she decided not to do that. So we want to honor our forebears. And even though we may not be genetic descendants of those like Jack Yates and Opal Lee, they're part of our history, all of us. And they're helping us all become more of who we can be as a nation of equality and freedom. So I'm so grateful to honor all those, many of them sitting in this room, who have done their part to bring us into greater equality, freedom. I do want to talk about Father's Day as well. And I was like, how am I going to do this? I'm going to talk about Juneteenth, I'm going to talk about Father's Day, but I think I'm going to get to the place where we're going to pull these together. I hope so. I'm walking on a higher wire without a net a little bit. We'll see how this goes. I'm going to talk about my own sweet father. I don't know why. It'll be 6 years since his passing this October 30th, and we really lost him before that because of Alzheimer's disease. And it's hitting me harder this year than I think it ever has. There's a saying for those who do grief work that every loss brings up every loss. And I'm feeling a lot of loss. And it just, whenever I think of my dad, that still grips my throat. This year, for weeks now, I've been like, I've got to get my dad a Father's Day card. And as soon as I have the thought, I'm like, no, my dad's gone, but it's just, he's present. I talked about it during my Friday live stream a little bit, and one of our distanced members from Washington State, who has this gift to communicate with those on the other side of the veil, sent me a text, and she said, I got a message from your dad if you want to hear. And I was like, yeah, I do. And she described, she doesn't know my story, but she described really accurately some of the experiences that my dad and I shared, and that he worked so hard to provide for his family. He wasn't always able to be there for us as presently as he wanted to be. And that she also said that he knew that I was gay at a young age, and he was scared for me. And that drove some of his choices and his actions. I'm happy to say that by the time I was in my 20s and 30s, my dad and I were so healed in our relationship. He was my greatest champion. He was my greatest hero. He was my biggest fan. A little bit later, I'm going to sing a song, his favorite, and I just have this incredible memory of him sitting right there where Ed is sitting as I sang that song for him a few years ago. My dad and I are good. But I want to share a story with you, and I've shared it before, but it's a different point I want to take from it. When I was 3 years old, my babysitters, Julie and Anita Sains, gave me a cast-off baby doll, one that it was not in good shape, I'll tell you. About half the hair had been pulled out of the scalp. It only had one eye that opened. But I loved that doll. I just worshiped Julie and Anita. They were both in high school. Anita played flute in the band. I thought that was the most glamorous thing ever. And they gave me this doll, and I just loved it. So I carried it with me everywhere, and I remember people kind of laughing at that, but I took it to church one Sunday morning, and the way we did church at the Avant Methodist Church in Oklahoma is that Sunday school is at 10:30, is that right? 9:30. And everybody was in Sunday school, and then the kids would come out before the 10:30 service, and we would recite a Bible verse, or we'd sing a song, and here comes Michael Gott carrying his little beat-up, bedraggled baby doll. And my dad saw it, and he didn't like it. There was a big row in the family after that service. He took the doll away. He said he was going to burn it. No son of mine is going to carry a doll. And I remember there was raised voices. I was 3. I don't have strong, clear memories of the words, but I remember the energy of it, and I remember being and I was crying and crying. And I got some important messages about what was acceptable and about who I was at 3 years old. Years later, as I was really coming to terms with my sexual orientation, I was poking around in the garage on my dad's workbench, and in the back of this work drawer was that doll. He didn't burn it. And we never talked about it. I don't know why. He would have been fine with me asking about it, but I never did. And so when I got the message from my friend Janet saying that my dad was scared for me, that made a lot more sense. That he wasn't bigoted in that way that I ever saw, but he knew that a little boy that played with dolls was going to have a hard time, and I did. I mean, I learned to kind of moderate my behavior, but I was bullied at 3 different times by 3 different people at different ages of my growing up because I was different. My dad, he hated that. He would have fought those kids himself, I'm telling you. He just hated that I went through that. Years later, when I had done a lot of therapy and some 12-step recovery and some good new thought teaching, I'd begun to heal a lot of those old beliefs that I carried from that time. But I will tell you that it was in my 40s that I was doing a process. I was in ministerial school, and we were doing a process on a current relationship that was troubled or sticky, and then the process allowed us to identify, many of you know it, I've done it, fear to faith. Those of you who've been in workshops or have done counseling with me, you know that work. And that memory came back of the doll and it being taken away from me. And the belief that God instilled in me at 3 years old was if I show up as my authentic self, I hurt the people I love. And I carried that belief for 40 years. I don't carry that belief anymore. I really don't. And I know that some of you have struggled to have a gay pastor. I know that that's been hard for some of you. And I just encourage you to take that work to wherever you need to take it to. But I'll tell you, we had these T-shirts at Unity Village last week that said, unapologetically inclusive. And that's who we are. Unapologetically inclusive. And next week, we're going to be celebrating Pride right here on this stage, as we do every year. Because we want, no matter who you are, we want you to know that you are worthy and you are welcome in this community. But it made sense to me that my dad saw me with that doll. And I found a picture of myself when I was about 4, just right over my jaw. Gosh, was I cute. I mean, just innocent, oh my Lord. And I still, he's in here. I feel him. That child who's never been bullied or harmed in any way, and the truth is, I don't think that my playing with dolls had much to do with the fact that I'm gay. I'm just a nurturing being. I was the same way with kittens and puppies, and little babies. Even when I was like 6 and 7, I would go get the babies. I loved to be able to nurture them. So I think that was just part of who I am. When I was probably about, I'm trying to think about this, maybe in my early 40s, about that same time as I did that healing work on this, I was visiting my parents in Oklahoma, and I can't remember if my dad had been diagnosed yet, but he was beginning to show some memory issues. But he'd been long retired, and I think my mom was still working, and he and I were in their living room watching Good Morning America one morning. And it was probably in 2013, 2014, because marriage equality was a big conversation. It was on the news. And my dad was sitting in a chair over across the room, and he just said, I just can't understand people that don't accept gay people, that would be opposed to gay marriage. I don't understand that. And I was like, okay. This is, a man from a little town in Oklahoma. He called himself the Yellow Dog Democrat. You know what that means? That even if a yellow dog was on the ticket, they're going to vote for him. Surrounded by a sea of red in our family. I'm not going to get political. That's my dad, just kind of independent street. And he said, Michael, you and my Uncle David, who's also gay, he said, you are the finest men I've ever known. And I said, thank you, Dad. No, and wait. And then he got up and he came across the room and he got on his knees and he took my hand and tears pouring down his face. And he said, no, you listen to me. You and my Uncle David are the finest men I've ever known. So my dad and I are good. We're healed. And I've been aware lately that I wouldn't be who I am. I wouldn't be able to do this work I do if I had had a different dad. If I had a dad who didn't know how to protect me, I wouldn't be able to do what I do. So I'm so grateful. And he had a tough childhood. He had a father who was not nurturing and protecting. His father ran around on my grandmother and beat her. Now, he had a salvation experience in his 50s watching a Billy Graham, not even watching it. He was in the bedroom while my grandmother was watching a Billy Graham crusade. And he went to church the next day, and he was changed. But my dad was never able to forgive. On some level he was, but not really. And I realized that my dad, the pain of his experience of his father is what gave him the opening to love me. It was important that he do it differently for his kids. And both my brothers feel the same. He just gave so much to us. And here's where I'm going to try my sweet dad back into Juneteenth. You see, love makes room for everybody. Love makes room. Fear excludes. Love includes. And so some people have wondered why we do this work on racial healing in this church and why we think that's important. And it's our principles. It's our principles. There's a passage. It's actually written in the three synoptic gospels, both in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. I'm going to read it from Matthew 9. Well, I was going to, but I didn't put it in my notes, but I know what it says. The Pharisees criticized Jesus because he attended a feast at a tax collector's house, and it says there were many sinners there. And they said, who is this guy that associates with people like that? And Jesus turned to them and said, who needs the physician but those who are ill? See, Jesus included. He didn't exclude. Even though the religious culture of his day called him wrong, and they excluded him because of who he included. You know, there's an old joke about, those who had very strong heaven and hell theology and what you had to do to get to heaven and how many people are going to hell. And they say, well, they're going to have the best music down there. Never mind. I'm not going to explain that one. Musicians tend to be a little wild. That's all I'm saying. And in Luke 15, let me find it here. Now the tax collectors and the sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, this man welcomes sinners and eats with them. Food purity was an important thing in Jewish culture. And then Jesus told them this parable. He said, suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one. Doesn't he leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? And when he finds it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. And he calls his friends and his neighbors together and he says, rejoice with me. I have found my lost sheep. And I tell you that there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous people who do not need to repent. Now, sinner is a weird word. We don't use it a lot in Unity. But I grew up hearing it. And I was told who the sinners were, who the righteous were. In dualistic theology, there's usually a clear line of who the good ones are, who are the acceptable in God's sight, and those who are not. And by many measures, I am not. As a gay man, I'm excluded. And many other people have been excluded. Aren't you glad we go to a church that doesn't do that? But I've been thinking about this all week. I knew that I wanted to teach on this parable for today's message. And I knew another thing, that I'm aware that there is, particularly among white men, and I am one, and there are many of us here, that when we start talking about diversity and inclusion and equity, it can get uncomfortable. And many men, including some in this church, have said, I feel like something's being taken away from me. And I understand that thought. That when we grew up in a culture of patriarchy, and if you look at the pictures of the Supreme Court going back to the beginning, if you want to see what I'm talking about. That now we have a little bit more diversity there, but for the first couple of centuries, there was none. Thurgood Marshall, I believe, was the first person who was a non-white male to ever be on the Supreme Court. Somebody will correct me if I'm wrong on that. And so this week I was at the convention, and the leaders of our Healing the Heart of America were presenting a workshop, 2-day workshop at convention back in Kansas City. And Dr. Jean Ladding is one of our co-chairs. And I went to lunch with her and Cindy Wigglesworth, one of the other co-chairs. And I asked Jean about this. Jean is African American, and she's done a lot of work on and she said what there is there's an information gap. That if people knew what the real history was, they would feel differently. But when there's sometimes this desire not to hear it because of this fear of something being taken, I said, how do we do this? And she told me about some friends of hers, a couple. And I don't remember if the race of the wife is important or not, but I know that the husband was white. And when they would do the work, she would do most of the facilitation. And she said, and then the husband, who was a trained psychotherapist, would be with the white men as they cried. And I asked her, why were they crying? She said, because they realized they'd been lied to. And I think about those Pharisees who are so sure of their rightness, and now people are being invited to the party. It doesn't feel right to them. And I'm thinking about who the true sinners are in this story. And when we say sin in unity, we mean missing the mark. That's the Aramaic term that Jesus would have used if he was saying the word sin, an archery term. None of us is perfect. But those who followed the law according to exact what you can eat and when, are they righteous? If they're excluding, if they're not demonstrating God's love into the world, then they too are what? Sinners. They're missing the mark. So I can feel it got really quiet in here. This may make you a little uncomfortable. But what I want to invite you into is the possibility that it's okay that we don't get it right. It's okay that we haven't learned everything we need to learn yet, but let's open our hearts to being more inclusive and to learning what we need to learn. And I know I'm going a little bit long, but I want to share this poem to close. I shared it last year, so this is my other Father's Day tradition. Almost a prose poem. I love this piece. And it is by Naomi Shihab Nye. Wandering around the Albuquerque airport terminal after learning my flight had been delayed 4 hours, I heard an announcement. If anyone in the vicinity of gate A4 understands any Arabic, please come to the gate immediately. Well, one pauses these days. Gate A4 was my own gate, and I went there. An older woman in full traditional Palestinian embroidered dress, just like my grandma wore, was crumpled to the floor, wailing, "Help," said the flight attendant. "Talk to her. What is her problem?" We told her the flight was going to be late, and she did this. And I stooped to put my arm around the woman, and I spoke haltingly. "Shudawa, shubid uk habiti. Stani shwe, min fadik, shubit sewi." The minute she heard any words she knew, however poorly used, she stopped crying. She thought the flight had been canceled entirely. She needed to get to El Paso for major medical treatment. "No, we're fine. You'll get there. Just later. Who is picking you up? Let's call him." We called her son, and I spoke to him in English, and I told him I would stay with his mother till we got on the plane and ride next to her. She talked to him. And then we called her other sons just for the fun of it. We called my dad, and he and she spoke for a while in Arabic and found out, of course, they have 10 shared friends. Then I thought, just for the heck of it, why not call some Palestinian poets I know and let them chat with her? This all took about 2 hours. She was laughing a lot by then, telling of her life, patting my knee, answering questions. She pulled a sack of homemade mamul cookies, little powdered sugar crumbly mounds stuffed with dates and nuts from her bag, and was offering them to all the women at the gate. And to my amazement, not a single woman declined one. It was like a sacrament. The traveler from Argentina, the mom from California, the lovely woman from Laredo, we were all covered in the same powdered sugar and smiling. There is no better cookie. Then the airline broke out free apple juice from huge coolers, and 2 little girls from our flight ran around serving it, and they were covered with powdered sugar too. And I noticed that my new best friend, by now we were holding hands, had a potted plant poking out of her bag, some medicinal thing with green furry leaves. Such an old country tradition. Always carry a plant. Always stay rooted to somewhere. And I looked around that gate of late and weary ones, and I thought, this is the world I want to live in. The shared world. Not a single person in that gate. once the crying confusion stopped, seemed apprehensive about any other person. They took the cookies. I wanted to hug all those other women too. This can still happen anywhere. Not everything is lost. Will you join me in prayer? And so I can feel our hearts just tenderly open to that hope. Can we create this kind of a world of love and possibility? And my heart wants to shout, yes, but I'm afraid. When I see the hatred and the division, the judgment, the criticism in the world, it's hard to believe that this other world is possible. But in this moment, I remember there is only one presence and power. It is God, and the nature of God is love. All that is not like love is an illusion or a misunderstanding. And so I anchor my faith to this place, to this deep truth that God is love. And we commit to bringing more of this love to get the powdered sugar on us all, to share, to connect. And so today we honor all those who have given so much to give us this possibility. And we bless those who are still in the darkness, who still believe there are enemies, and who still believe there are those who are not born of God. And we include them too. God is present in and through and as them, even though they may not know. So God, move upon our hearts, reveal to us what is ours to do, show us how we can be who you have created us to be, sons and daughters of love, givers and receivers of perfect love. We give thanks, we let it be, and so it is. Amen. I'm going to miss you guys. I'm leaving in 3 weeks. 2 weeks I'm leaving. I'll be here next week and the week after. I don't know how I'm going to make it for 2 months on this sabbatical, but I will. I'll take you with me. If no one has told you today that they love you, I love you so much. God bless you. Thank you for watching this message today. I'd like to invite you to join us in person here on campus at Unity of Houston for Sunday morning or Wednesday evening services. If you can't be with us here on our campus, you can still join us live on Facebook or on our website, unityhouston.org, Sunday mornings at 11 a.m. Central.